In 1856, Iowa was a land in the midst of transformation. The frontier was expanding, settlers were carving out new lives for themselves, and the region's history was being shaped above ground. The state's story, as recounted by most historians, has been framed in the context of westward expansion, new settlements, and the rapid establishment of towns and communities. The construction of new buildings and roads was heralded as progress, a signal that Iowa was becoming an integral part of the growing American landscape. However, beneath the surface of this outwardly bustling activity, an entirely different and far more enigmatic story was taking place, one that has remained largely ignored by mainstream historical accounts. The hidden chapter of Iowa's history began in the most unremarkable of ways. In 1856, workers were tasked with preparing a construction site for a new building for Governor Grimes on the corner of Main and Valley Streets in Iowa. The assignment was a simple one: dig a foundation for the new structure, create a cellar, and prepare the site for the planned construction. The workmen, unaware of the secrets that lay beneath their feet, began their task with the expectation of encountering nothing more than the ordinary dirt and soil of the Iowa prairie. But as their tools broke through the surface and deeper into the earth, they struck something unexpected, a solid obstruction that should not have been there. At first, it seemed like an anomaly, a mistake in the digging process. But the workers quickly realized that this was no ordinary obstruction. They had uncovered an arched vault, an ancient structure buried beneath the prairie soil. Measuring approximately 10 feet by 10 feet, the vault's presence was completely out of place, especially considering Iowa's history and development up to that point. The settlers of 1856 had never built such a structure. Its construction was sophisticated, its dimensions precise, and its purpose unclear. But what lay inside was even more perplexing: 8 human skeletons, each one of extraordinary size, measuring approximately 8 to 10 feet in length. This discovery was so unusual that it caught the attention of the local newspaper, which published a brief article. However, instead of fueling further investigation or sparking widespread interest, the report was quickly forgotten. The story was soon dismissed as if it had never happened. There was no scientific inquiry, no follow-up investigations, and no official records that sought to understand or preserve the findings. What should have been a groundbreaking archaeological discovery was reduced to a mere footnote in local history. The initial explanation offered by the authorities was one of skepticism. The remains, it was suggested, could have been misidentified Native American remains or perhaps the product of frontier myths. Such conclusions were based on the prevailing scientific narrative of the time, which had little room for anything that didn't fit within the accepted framework of history. Yet, the original 1856 newspaper article, still preserved in a few archives, told a very different story. It wasn't the sensationalized tale of overzealous frontier speculation. The vault was real. The skeletons were real. And they were unlike anything anyone in Iowa, or anywhere in the United States, had ever seen before. What makes this discovery particularly significant is the way it was handled, or more accurately, mishandled. It wasn't just that the discovery was overlooked. It was actively erased from public memory. In the years following the initial report, no one from the scientific community came to study the site. No specialists examined the remains, and no institutions took an interest in preserving what could have been a crucial piece of American prehistory. Instead, the vault was filled in, the skeletons vanished, and the story faded into oblivion. This was not a case of neglect, but rather one of convenience. Iowa in 1856 was barely a settled state, and there were no established archaeological institutions or scientific frameworks in place to examine such a discovery. The settlers had no way of understanding the significance of what they had uncovered. They were more focused on building their future than they were on investigating the mysteries of the past. Moreover, there were no systems in place to preserve such a find. As a result, the vault and its contents were buried, both literally and figuratively, and the story was left to linger in the margins of history. Over time, the original newspaper report became a footnote in Iowa's past, barely mentioned and easily dismissed. But for those who look closely, the gaps in this narrative are glaring. What was discovered beneath the soil was not simply a burial chamber. It was evidence of a highly advanced and sophisticated civilization, one that understood engineering, architecture, and material science in ways that were far beyond the capabilities of 19th-century settlers. The vault's construction, with its indestructible mortar, thick walls, and arched design, was unlike anything built by the pioneers of Iowa. It suggested a level of knowledge and craftsmanship that did not align with any known population of the region. But if the discovery was so extraordinary, why was it so quickly forgotten? Why didn't scientific minds of the time take notice? And why, despite its significance, did the vault vanish without a trace? The answer lies not in ignorance, but in the prevailing historical narrative of the time. The mid-19th century was a period of colonial expansion, and the story of America's past was one of discovery, settlement, and conquest. The presence of a mysterious civilization that predated the Native American tribes, one capable of building monumental structures, would have challenged everything that historians and archaeologists thought they knew about the country's history. Such a discovery would have upset the accepted timeline and, perhaps, cast doubt on the idea of a linear progression of civilization. The last thing the rapidly expanding frontier needed was a revision of its origins. Thus, the discovery of the vault beneath Iowa became a casualty of its time. Anomalies like these threatened to complicate the straightforward narrative of history. And so, it was buried, both physically and within the annals of forgotten history. As the excavation of the vault progressed, the workmen were faced with even more mysteries. They initially approached the find with a sense of curiosity, trying to rationalize it within the framework of what they understood about Iowa and its history. The vault's sudden and unexpected presence beneath the prairie was perplexing enough, but the deeper the crew dug, the more irregularities they uncovered. What they had stumbled upon was no ordinary burial site, nor was it a relic of any known civilization in the region. It was something far more complex and unsettling. The construction of the vault itself was the first anomaly to raise suspicion. The workers were no strangers to building simple structures, having lived through the rough frontier life where makeshift homes and temporary shelters were the norm. But what they found beneath the earth was far beyond anything they had ever seen. The vault was not a hastily constructed pit or a simple wooden frame. Instead, it was a carefully designed and meticulously built structure. The vault's most striking feature was its arch. The arch, a highly sophisticated construction technique, was not something easily achieved by the settlers of the time. Arch construction requires precision, careful stone placement, and a deep understanding of load distribution. It is not the type of design used in the hurried construction of frontier homes. The arched ceiling was not simply decorative, it served a structural purpose. It indicated a level of engineering knowledge far beyond what was common for the time. In fact, the knowledge required to construct an arch that would withstand the weight of the earth and the passing of centuries seemed impossible to reconcile with the settlers' capabilities. In the mid-19th century, arch construction was a technique reserved for much more permanent structures, buildings designed to endure. The very existence of this arch suggested that the people who built the vault had a far more advanced understanding of engineering than was assumed for the settlers of Iowa. As the workers continued to clear the site, they found that the walls of the vault were equally impressive. The walls, measuring 14 inches thick, were made of a cement-like material that was described as indestructible. This was not the kind of mortar or construction material one would expect in a frontier settlement. The workers noted that the mortar did not crumble or weaken when exposed to moisture or frost, a characteristic that set it apart from any other material they had encountered. It was a substance that seemed far more advanced than the materials used in construction at the time. The very thickness of the walls was another puzzling feature. To build a structure with walls that thick, especially one intended to be buried under the earth, suggested that the builders had a specific goal in mind: to protect whatever was inside from the pressure of the earth above it, from the ravages of time, and from the decay that would naturally occur in a typical burial site. The workers could not have known it then, but they were witnessing the remnants of a highly durable and permanent structure, something built to last far beyond the life of any wooden structure or typical grave. These construction techniques, so advanced for their time, indicated that the builders of the vault had access to knowledge that had been lost to time. The idea that such techniques were available in a time and place like 1856 Iowa was utterly incongruous. The vault's durability, combined with the arch's engineering, strongly suggested that the builders had mastered construction principles that modern society still struggled to perfect. But it wasn't just the vault structure that raised questions. It was what the workers discovered inside. The vault contained 8 human skeletons, each one remarkably large, between 8 to 10 feet tall. The sheer size of the remains was astonishing, especially considering that no such human population was known to have ever existed in Iowa or anywhere else in North America. The workers' reactions were not of excitement or celebration, but of confusion and unease. These weren't just unusual remains, they were giant skeletons, the largest ever found in the region. The idea that such enormous individuals could have once walked the earth seemed almost impossible, yet the skeletons were there, clearly preserved in a way that suggested intentional care. The workers initially struggled to understand the significance of what they had found. Perhaps it was an ancient burial site from a forgotten culture or a storage vault for an earlier group of settlers. But as they continued to investigate, the evidence pointed in one direction. The skeletons did not fit into any known historical context. The bones were not those of ordinary human beings. They were of extraordinary proportions, suggesting the presence of a race of people that didn't align with the accepted historical narrative of Iowa or the larger North American continent. The workers, unsure of how to interpret the find, whispered among themselves. They had no terms to describe what they were seeing. The idea of giants was not a common belief among the settlers, and certainly not one that would have been considered plausible. But as they looked at the size of the bones and the way they were arranged, they couldn't ignore the overwhelming evidence that these were no ordinary human remains. The vault had clearly been constructed to preserve these individuals, with great care and intention. This wasn't a haphazard burial site. It was a deliberate, structured placement of extraordinary bodies, in a place designed to protect them for generations to come. At this point, the workers began to acknowledge a chilling possibility. They had uncovered a burial site that didn't fit within any known framework of human history. This wasn't just a curiosity, it was a direct challenge to the established narrative of what had occurred in North America before European settlers arrived. Who were these giants? Where did they come from? And why were they buried in such a meticulous manner? These were questions that the settlers of Iowa, and indeed the entire American frontier, were not prepared to answer. The implications of such a discovery were far-reaching. If these skeletons were real, and if they truly came from a civilization that predated any known history of the region, then it would require a complete rethinking of what we know about ancient North America. The disappearance of the Iowa Vault discovery is perhaps the most perplexing aspect of the entire story. After the workers uncovered the arched vault and the gigantic skeletons within, one would expect the discovery to make waves, especially in a rapidly developing nation like America. It should have been the subject of intense scientific scrutiny, with teams of archaeologists, historians, and anthropologists flocking to Iowa to investigate the implications of such a significant find. Yet, what followed the initial report in the local newspaper was nothing short of a cover-up. The vault and its contents were quietly buried, both literally and metaphorically, and the discovery faded from public memory almost as quickly as it had been uncovered. The silence surrounding the find is striking. No representatives from the Smithsonian Institution, no archaeologists, no scientific experts arrived to examine the vault or the remains. In fact, there were no follow-up reports from the local press. No one from the growing field of archaeology took an interest in what could have been one of the most extraordinary archaeological discoveries in American history. Instead, the story vanished without a trace, as if the vault and the skeletons had never existed. The fact that the vault was filled in as construction on Governor Grimes's building continued is telling. The local community, still in the midst of settling and developing the area, had no framework for understanding what they had uncovered. Archaeology was not a well-established discipline in the mid-19th century, and there was no infrastructure in place to preserve such finds. The settlers were far more concerned with the practical matters of building homes, farms, and businesses. To them, the vault was an oddity that didn't fit within their understanding of history and therefore didn't warrant further investigation. But while the initial lack of understanding may explain the immediate neglect of the discovery, it doesn't account for the years that followed. As the decades passed, the vault's existence was completely erased from public consciousness. No scientific expeditions were sent to investigate, even as more advanced archaeological methods became available. No photographs were taken of the skeletons, and no records were made of the measurements or detailed descriptions. The remains were either lost to private collections, hidden in obscure archives, or simply destroyed without a trace. The decision to fill in the vault and continue construction is a choice that suggests far more than simple oversight. It points to a deliberate attempt to suppress a discovery that didn't fit with the accepted historical narrative. This pattern of suppression is not unique to Iowa. Throughout the 1800s, similar discoveries were reported across the United States, often involving burial mounds or ancient structures that appeared to contain enormous human skeletons. In Wisconsin in 1891, investigators found burial mounds containing remains of unusual size, which were sent to Washington, but were never publicly displayed or studied. The same pattern can be found in Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania. In each case, there were brief newspaper mentions of the discovery, followed by an eerie silence. The remains were either lost, destroyed, or quietly stored away in private collections where they were never studied. The fact that these discoveries followed such a predictable pattern raises serious questions. The locations of these finds are significant. They often clustered along river valleys, near major waterways in regions that suggested a widespread population. The burial structures were not simple graves, but engineered mounds or vaults, structures that indicated a much more advanced society than was thought to have existed in pre-colonial America. Many of these burial mounds contained sophisticated artifacts, such as copper ornaments and tools, which suggested a culture capable of metallurgy and other advanced crafts. Yet, despite the significant evidence provided by these finds, no systematic studies were conducted. Instead, the remains vanished and the mounds were destroyed, often to make way for agricultural development or urban expansion. One could argue that these disappearances were simply the result of ignorance or a lack of infrastructure. The United States was still a young nation, and its scientific community was in its infancy. However, as time passed and archaeology became a more established field, the pattern of neglect and suppression continued. By the late 1800s, museums and universities were collecting artifacts and conducting studies on Native American history, yet no serious effort was made to investigate these giant skeletons or the vaults that contained them. What was so troubling about these discoveries that they were swept under the rug so efficiently? The most plausible answer lies in the prevailing historical narrative of the time. In the 19th century, the dominant view of American history was that Native Americans were the first and only inhabitants of the continent. According to this narrative, they had arrived via the Bering Land Bridge and developed in isolation from the rest of the world. This view was reinforced by the idea that Native American societies were primitive, with no permanent architecture or advanced technologies. Any discovery that suggested otherwise, such as the presence of giant skeletons or the construction of monumental burial structures, posed a direct challenge to this narrative. If there had been a population of giants who predated or lived alongside Native Americans, it would disrupt the widely accepted timeline of American history. In a society where the narrative of manifest destiny and the superiority of Western civilization were dominant, it's not hard to see why the discovery of a more sophisticated and ancient civilization would be inconvenient. Such findings could suggest that there were civilizations in North America long before the arrival of European settlers, a reality that would have undermined the myth of American exceptionalism. The decision to ignore or suppress these discoveries wasn't a matter of ignorance, but of maintaining a coherent and acceptable narrative that aligned with the political and cultural ideologies of the time. The fact that the remains and the vault in Iowa, as well as similar discoveries across the country, were systematically erased from history suggests that institutional gatekeeping was at play. This wasn't an accidental loss of evidence. It was a deliberate decision to ignore, dismiss, or hide evidence that didn't fit the narrative. The scientific community, with its close ties to the power structures of the time, made quiet decisions about what questions were worth asking and what evidence was worth preserving. In doing so, they ensured that the story of the giants and the sophisticated civilizations that preceded Native Americans would remain buried, lost in the gaps, silences, and forgotten records of history. The buried vault in Iowa was not an isolated anomaly. It was part of a larger pattern of suppression that extended across the United States. The evidence for this ancient civilization, and for the existence of a population of giants, is fragmented but undeniable. It can be found in the newspaper articles that were never followed up, the artifacts that were never cataloged, and the discoveries that were quietly erased. What we're left with are clues, fragments of a larger story that mainstream archaeology has largely chosen to ignore.